Can we get an audio confirmation, please?
We are here.
Oh, we're talking to me?
No, sorry, I was just talking to anyone. I just wanted to verify I had audio. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, there's a screen here about Zoom to change my display name. I already put all that information in. I don't know how to get rid of the screen.
That's a screen that we put up. We're gonna get started here shortly.
Oh, okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see you all. Call this meeting to order. I'll launch right in. Item 1 is a motion to approve a special rule limiting each speaker to 2 minutes each time they're recognized. A 2/3 majority of those present and voting is required to approve the special rule. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, host, please initiate the poll.
We'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 163 ayes, 4 nays, and 1 abstention, the motion does prevail.
Thank you. Before I move into item 2, I want to make a quick note, a point of order, if you will, that we know we have new business today. And so in the interest of time, we're going to be particularly cognizant of the time constraints under each item for presentation during this meeting so that we can ensure that there's an appropriate and robust conversation during new business. With that said, item 2 concerns administrative responses to Senate actions and is presented for information. Item 3 is a list of recent faculty, staff, and student deaths that have been forwarded for announcement to the Senate. I invite you to observe a moment of silence while we read these names. Jason Ellis, Christopher Honda, Dennis Johnson, Mary McCorrison, William Stewart, and Neil V. Meister. Item 4 is approval of minutes from the November 5th, 2020 University and Faculty Senate meeting. Host, if you could please initiate a poll on the approval of the minutes.
We'll again give it 10 seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 170 ayes, 0 nays, and 10 abstentions, the motion prevails.
Thank you. Item 5 is the official introduction of Senior Vice President Myron Franz to the Senate. I'm pleased to introduce you to our new Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations, Myron Franz. He actually joined the university at the end of September. Myron is a recognized leader in strategic financial management, having served most recently under Governor Tim Walz as Commissioner of the Minnesota Management and Budget Office, or better known as MMB. In this role, he served the state of Minnesota as its Chief Financial Officer, Chief Accounting Officer, Chief HR Officer, and the State Controller. And he drove innovation and flexibility into the state's $47 billion annual budget. He has incredible experience and particular experience around strategic stewardship that he brings to our systems and our operations across all of our campuses. Through his leadership, we're looking forward to evolving in ways that make us better while also navigating our known and very challenging fiscal constraints. The Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations is a critical leadership position in the cabinet and across the institution. It is the next most senior system-wide position after the executive vice president and provost, and serves 3 really critical roles: the CFO, the COO, and our treasurer. So given the significant fiscal challenges that we're facing with the impact of COVID-19, now is an incredibly important time for us to have a seasoned finance leader like Myron as part of our team. His service to the state and knowledge of the state will be instrumental to his success. And overall, he's in a position to advise us well on the financial future of the institution. So I know you join me in welcoming him. And Myron, if you would like to say a few words.
Thank you, President Gable, and thank you all for letting me get introduced today and have a chance to speak with you. I'll be talking a little bit later on about some budget issues, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to say how excited I am to be here and to be working at the university with all of you. I've always felt that the University of Minnesota has been one of the most important institutions in the state of Minnesota, and I think that opportunity will exist in the future for the university, but it's one we have to step up and exercise the right kind of leadership. I think there's going to be challenges for the state of Minnesota to retain its special outlook that it has around the country in terms of talent and interesting things going on in the state of Minnesota, one where things get done and things get done well. You know, one of the things that I learned in the last 10 years, you know, I started in 2011 working for Governor Dayton when we had a $6.5 billion deficit. And we worked through that. We worked through that by careful budgeting, careful working with revenues and cost containment issues, but we were able to turn the state around. We paid back the money we had borrowed from the schools, the K through 12 schools. We took an empty budget reserve and filled it up to $2.3 billion. And you know, we were able to restore our AAA credit rating. And the reason I say this is that these kinds of times that we're in right now are difficult, and they require us to step up and take the right opportunity to make sure that we make tough decisions and we make them for the long term, not just for the short term, but also for the long term. So I'm really excited about being able to help play that role, working with all of you, getting your input, hearing from you those core issues that you want to deal with, and the really important elements of the university to make it so special. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and I look forward to meeting each and every one of you whenever I can. I hope someday we can have that cup of coffee or a cup of tea or some other libation where we can sit around and chat. I'm really looking forward to that because I love meeting people like that. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you, President Gable.
Thank you, Myron. The next item is the President's Report, and I'm delighted to be with you today to present it. What a semester we've had, and we made it through. I don't know how many of you were like me, where I had a big red circle around Thanksgiving and what that demarcated, and I know we're not done yet, but that did seem like the highest of the hurdles for us to get over. And the winter break being in sight is much appreciated, I know. So very grateful, cannot say that enough, for everything you all do all day, every day, to take care of each other, faculty, staff, and students, your excellence in your service and in your advocacy, and how you've stepped up to the plate in all of the different roles that you play is critically important. I want to give a particular shout out to our students who continue to persevere and navigate this extremely challenging time without taking their foot off the gas at all in their advocacy and in their leadership and expectations of what the campus can and should be, and I'm very grateful to them too. So a few updates for you. COVID update. So we've had a tremendous partnership through all of this with the Minnesota Department of Health, largely bridged by our colleague Jill DeBoer, who runs the Hero Response and is the Deputy Director of CIDRAP with Mike Osterholm. They and her, they being MDH and her, have been really invaluable resources for us. As we've navigated the fall semester, we've learned a lot, and that will carry over, I hope and expect, into a smooth spring semester. So as we review those lessons learned from how we rolled out the Sunrise Plan broadly, that put some of you back in your offices and labs and allowed some of our operations to start over the summer, to the specific maroon and gold phase of the Sunrise Plan, which was where we brought students back and kicked off the fall semester. A lot of that will carry over into the spring. It will also help us understand better where we might need additional testing resources. at the beginning of the fall semester, those resources simply weren't available. I know it seems like a lifetime ago that there were not enough tests to go around. That is much less of an issue now. It's not a completely non-existent issue, but it's less of an issue. It gives us more choices. Testing is faster. There are more and more options that allow people to test on their own without the oversight of a clinician, which obviously increases capacity greatly. But in the meantime, we're still partnered with the state on the state's main saliva test program, which the state partnered with us to provide to faculty and staff, and then the university provided to students so that everyone on the campus would have access to it. The M-Test program for people who are symptomatic or known to be exposed remains active. But I think one of the really important things to think about that has informed our strategy, and I know not everyone has agreed with this, but if you look at what happened here, or more importantly, what didn't happen here in terms of transmission relative to many of our peers, some of whom had similar testing protocols to us, and some of whom had really frequent testing, mandatory testing protocols. Testing is information. Testing in and of itself is not prevention. The best, and in fact, until we have a vaccine, only actual prevention comes from physical distancing, masking, and other hygiene steps that we've taken. And so that fact will be the cornerstone of our spring plans. If you're on a Sunrise plan that has informed whether you're in your office or doing something that's on campus, we expect those plans to carry forward. As you know, faculty still have independence in the selection of their modality, which will be very similar to fall semester. The semester will start as it's scheduled to and finish as it's scheduled to. If circumstances remain the way they are, we expect the spring semester to be very much like fall, with the exception that we moved spring break back, as you know, and as we discussed last time. With regard to the vaccine and how that might change our lives, we are, of course, all very excited about this progress. I mean, we can all see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I will say as much to myself as to all of you that we can't, it's always the darkest before the dawn. It's going to be rough between now and when that vaccine is readily available. It is not ready yet for wide distribution. There is some initial distribution to those at the highest risk this year, but the distribution that will likely impact our campus community will start sometime in early part of next year. We have a COVID vaccine team that is working with the Minnesota Department of Health to develop our protocols so that we can respond in an organized and planful way as soon as the vaccine is available. It will use the phased approach as it is developed. Every state will have their own. We will all look to CDC guidelines and then tailor those guidelines for the state of Minnesota, and then tailor those guidelines again for the University of Minnesota. But this team is experienced, actually. They've done this with the flu shot. It's the same team behind the scenes, the H1N1 pandemic vaccine. Hold your optimism. It is legitimate and real to be optimistic right now, but it is also probably not a shortest distance between 2 points journey. We have to maintain our commitment to prevention, and we do need to be patient as things will evolve, as more information becomes available, and sometimes things change quickly. But when that happens, I can promise you we will communicate perhaps even an annoyingly frequent amount of information to you, but there will not be anything we know that you don't know. And we will keep that process going as we go through the spring semester. All of this adds up to affect our financial landscape, as Myron referred to earlier, and it's no surprise to anybody. Our financial landscape has changed and evolved as we have more and more information. And I won't go into great detail on this because you're going to hear from Myron, Julie Tonneson, and Ken Horstman later today. They also have already presented to faculty, staff, and student consultative committee chairs and vice chairs. They've presented to the chair of the Senate Committee on Finance and Planning, and they attended the Senate Consultative Committee that same week. So we've been working this financial update through the consultative process so that we can take in as much information and give out as much information as possible. Very grateful for the engagement, and I'm very grateful for your partnership and sacrifice in our temporary and reduced salary process and furloughs that have been a very critical component to our navigation during this challenge. I will say, as we think about where we are exactly today, how pleased I am that we decided to go online fully after Thanksgiving. We knew there would be a second wave or a fall surge that had been predicted, but boy, did this timing work the way it was supposed to. And so I think that this has been a really important collaboration in terms of being not only of service to each other, but of service to the communities that are impacted by us, which of course are widespread. But even with that advanced planning and all the discussion we've had, I know how hard this has been on everyone, faculty, staff, and students. Lots of flexibility and lots of uncertainty that has required everyone to adapt. And it's been tough, but from where I sit, where I look at all of this work that has gone on, both from individual examples and in the aggregate, it's been tremendous and of the highest quality, and the individual commitment that makes all of that come together in this way is so apparent. And so I hear about it all the time, how people are grateful for what you're doing, and I hope you're hearing it too. So sometimes we only hear the bad news. I want to tell you that in the middle of all of this challenging news, you're just doing a really great job. And it's just so visible. Some other things that I want to let you know we've announced, but I want to remind everybody that we are supporting the governor's request that everyone who can work from home continue to do so. We pushed that to June 30th, 2021, just to give everybody clarity, especially people who have other familial demands or constraints on their time, so that you can make longer term plans to support yourselves and your families and each other while also de-densifying the campus. We've moved spring break, as you know, for the Twin Cities and Rochester campuses. Duluth, Crookston, and Morris have peppered their spring break, so everyone made adjustments to reflect these unique times that we're in. The final decision about what this will mean in terms of testing when we come back and timing when we come back, we are preparing multiple plans right now. And as frustrating as it is to not know for sure, one of the lessons we've learned in this process is that things change rapidly. So spring semester start is still quite a ways away. And we want to have as much information as possible before we make any decisions, so that we can make a decision that makes the most sense. If we made a decision today and then the availability of one of the components that would change our campus life becomes readily available, we wouldn't want to give everyone whiplash. We're trying to be as planful as possible, but we won't wait until the very last minute either. I expect more information to be rolled out in a very substantive way before the end of the calendar year, to the extent that that affects your decisions. A couple of other updates. The Vice President for Student Affairs search is well underway. We've had 2 finalists on campus. The public forums are posted and available. If you're unable to see them, we absolutely invite you to give feedback. I will remind you that this is a newly framed role reporting directly to the president. It is a recognition of the importance of the student voice in the administrative conversation. Of course, students are more than capable of expressing their own voice, but having their advocate in the cabinet and what that means for how we make our overall decision and planning on campus. So please do take a look at that and provide your feedback. We would be very grateful. The review that Dr. Alexander is doing around campus safety, he's finished his interviews. He did over 200 meetings. And this work was charged by me, but it's not really for me. It's for the Board of Regents. It's in response to the resolution of the Senate Committee on Equity, Access, and Diversity, and largely reflects the decision made last time at Senate to create oversight of campus safety. It's a piece of that process. We expect that report to be completed, if not by the end of the year, then very early in 2021. That is a piece of a larger consultation that'll happen. It'll inform that consultation. And then we will work together on what to do with both his recommendations and our expectations as a campus community. I do want to call to your attention that at the next Board of Regents meeting on December 11th, Chief Matt Clark will be giving a presentation on campus safety if you'd like to watch it online. He is reporting on what is going on campus in the surrounding neighborhoods, not on the longer term strategies around campus safety, but Obviously, that's a big part of the discussion, what's going on right now. And so if you would like to hear that, I encourage you to attend that portion of the meeting. On namings, last spring after George Floyd's tragic killing, I paused the Board of Regents naming policy. It needed more work in light of the deepened and increased awareness that those times broadly and the impact they had on all of us, and our thoughts around the dismantlement of systemic racism and our contribution and leadership there. I'm continuing to consult and discuss and examine that namings policy. I know there is a desire for action, but I want, it's arguably a legacy moment for the institution, and I want to get it right. And so I expect to have something for you this spring, and I appreciate your patience, and I want to assure you that the reason that it's taking this long is because of the depth of the work that we're doing and thought that's going into it, including the consultation. I also have an update for you on student mental health and the mental health initiative that I've referred to. As a reminder, this mental health initiative is part of the new system-wide strategic plan, which calls for the establishment of a system-wide student mental health initiative as part of our commitment to promoting student success. We had ideas about what the initiative would look like, but we wanted to hold any discussion of that until we held our statewide mental health summit, which took place on October 22nd. We did this in partnership with Minnesota State, the Private College Council, and the tribal colleges. There were representatives from all of our institutions, students, faculty, staff that were elected officials, board members from all the institutions. Over 700 people actually attended. And that summit affirmed many of our ideas, called some new thoughts to our attention, but absolutely invigorated our commitment to doing this and doing this well. I will have a formal discussion for you on this probably at our next Senate meeting, but I do want to describe the concept today so that you can marinate in it, and also so that we can begin to take feedback. My intention is to set up a structure very similar to PIPSM, with champions or chairs of a representative committee that would approach the student mental health challenge using public health frameworks the way we did with PIPSM, so that we can think about prevention, we can think about early intervention and detection and treatment, but with some added components around supporting the underlying cause research, and also supporting some of the unique ways in which we've already begun to approach the question. For example, the FCC self-charge to deepen its understanding of what it means to be accommodating from a ADA point of view, and how that might translate into mitigating circumstances in the classroom experience, which is a new direction for this work to take. So that's as far as the conceptualization is probably able to be articulated at this point, but that will start to take shape over the next few weeks, and we'll be announcing something on that soon. Also related to the strategic plan, we have begun the final phase of the preparation of the plan, which is the metrics, what used to be called the maroon and gold progress card. There will be an update to that. We will also add a higher level dashboard to that of the 12 or 15 key metrics that we would want pushed out to the public. That has been going through consultation, the metrics that is. It's up on the President's Office website. There are all a variety of points of feedback that can be provided. We will be presenting a draft of the metrics at the board meeting. The expectation is that it is not a near final draft, that is in fact just a draft, where there would be more conversation around the metrics or what might change. After that board meeting, we will go through additional loops of consultation. When we feel like we are essentially on the same page, either through agreement or compromise, we will bring forward a final version of the metrics to the board for approval. This has been a step-by-step process. We're handling the consultation on this process the same way we've handled all the other parts. It's been greatly appreciated. A lot of people have devoted a lot of time to providing feedback. It's made everything better. So I invite you to listen to the presentation to the board, and then provide your feedback individually, or invite us to your committee or group for additional conversation. That concludes my report. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. We did not receive any in advance, but I'm happy to take from the floor. Yes, Briggs.
Hi, President Gable. Thank you so much. Just listening to your report, I just kind of want to touch base a little bit more on the recommendations from the external consultant. Given that they are just that, recommendations, I was wondering, after you receive said recommendations, to what extent are you willing to enact those recommendations? Are there some things that you're a little bit more hesitant to enact that have been called for and possibly may show up in those recommendations? Just if you could touch base on that, I think that'd be very much appreciated.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Briggs. It's hard to answer that question because we really don't know. He has not said, we're not getting hints, if you will, of what he intends to include or not include. What I can commit to, having no idea what's ultimately going to be in the report, is that we will make the report publicly available and we'll go through a consultation process. That report is information. The way in which we would enact any change would become an advisory recommendation to the board. The way that a variety of things are changed in our campus life, depending on who has ultimate authority. And I'm very open to a very collaborative conversation on this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I believe the next question was from Annie.
I withdraw my question. Thank you.
Okay. Jonathan?
Hi, President Gable. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Professor in biomedical engineering and CSE. I wonder if you could comment on your thoughts, the university's thoughts on continuing the men and other sports basketball season in light of all of the outbreaks, both in professional and collegiate sports, and the model it sets for our students regarding social distancing. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm laughing because it's an incredibly hard question. The decision to suspend fall sports back in August was obviously an incredibly difficult decision at that time. And what we committed to was that we would only play if we could develop a protocol where we felt as if it was safe for the student athletes, that did not presume that there would be no transmission at all, or that there would be no cases, because there are cases everywhere until there is a vaccine. But and perhaps even then, as we are learning, that not all vaccines are perfect and that the virus may evolve, but that the transmissions did not make our student athletes bear any additional risk above or beyond what they would bear in their everyday life that we are all bearing right now by virtue of the fact that this is a risky time. It is getting worse, there's no question. The decision not to play or not to play is done at the conference level. And we have conference meetings frequently these days, as you might imagine. But I can say that it's being discussed every week as the information changes. And if it gets to the point where, in consultation with our medical advisors, which is a representative committee from across the conference, we would pause. But we want to wait to make that decision until we have the appropriate medical advice to do so.
Could I follow up really quickly, if you don't mind? In that discussion and consultation, are you considering the effect it has on the rest of the student body? For example, whether students are choosing to assemble to watch the games, and in that process, drinking alcohol, in which they become disinhibited in their social distancing? Is that part of the discussion?
In fact, it is. It's a lengthy part of the discussion. Both the student behavior and its, gathering to watch games is not limited to students. And the choices made in association with that. We had a similar discussion, by the way, around the election, not the voting process itself, but how people were watching election results. All events that have been likely to inspire gatherings have been a part of the discussion. The way in which the safety protocols work include assessment of what's happening in the surrounding community, not just amongst the student athletes. That's how we're capturing that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Scott?
Hello, President Gable. My
Hi,
name is
Scott.
Scott Petty. I'm a CFAN student senator. Just kind of a follow-up from Briggs's question. I believe the consulting contract that Dr. Alexander signed, that the university asserts ownership of the work product that goes into the report. As his final report will be made public, will the university in any way obstruct attempts to review the work like the internal documents that went into the report through the Minnesota Data Practices Act?
Well, I would like to say we never obstruct anything. We will only own the final report. I probably need to defer to OGC on the nuances of your question, but my gut reaction in pencil is that the work is his. We own, and then when he complies with the contract and provides the report, that's what we own.
I mean, I could be wrong. It's been a while since I read the contract, but I was struck by the contract. I was struck by what I thought the contract said, that the university asserted ownership of essentially all notes and materials that went into the creation of the report.
Yeah, I apologize.
Okay.
I don't remember the details, but I would be happy to consult with OGC and get a response to you offline, or anyone else who may be interested in the answer.
Thank you.
Sure. I think the next question is Phoebe.
Hi, President Gable. Thank you very much. I'm Sugi Ganeshanathan. I'm a CLA faculty senator. I wanted to ask, members of the faculty whose salaries were equitized in the last round of review of that process were told that their equitizations would be delayed as a result of the pandemic. And so half is going to into effect this upcoming fall, and then half the year after that. And that group of people are presumably disproportionately junior faculty, disproportionately women, disproportionately non-binary people, disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Considering the ongoing discussions that the university is having about equity, diversity, and inclusion, asking this group of people to wait in a period of time when there are also pay cuts going on seems problematic. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the process that went into those conversations and how that is proceeding, given that pay cuts are continuing.
Thank you. I'd have to defer to our head of HR for the details on exactly how that was decided and what the communication has been. And he's here today. We may be able to hold the question for when he's here. And then based on that response, I think it's better to talk to him first and then have me react to that, if you're willing.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe the next question is Ryan.
Thank you, President Gable. Ryan McTominay, I'm his CHD graduate student senator and member of the University Senate Disabilities Issues Committee. My question is this: particularly in light of myriad factors, including the letter that was written by the Disability Issues Committee to recommend a default position last fall for online instruction with the option of going in person. And also given the dynamics of COVID-19 as we know them today, that one, Thanksgiving witnessed the greatest amount of travel nationwide that has been observed since March. And that frankly, that was Thanksgiving before we get into the really deep holiday season. Given that even if an immunization for COVID is released as early as next month, that it will be a 2-dose vaccine that spans at least a month to get both the doses, and that rollout will be limited to in first wave medical responders and first responders only. What is the university's position given what will be and what has already been called to be a significant wave coming in the wake of the holiday season, December, January, February, for courses on campus.
Yes, so obviously we're watching the same information with real concern. I want to clarify, online wasn't necessarily the default. Faculty had independence on selecting their modality subject to space availability in classrooms, which were now required to be filled only with those who could be 6 feet apart, which reduced our classroom capacity just to the extent that's relevant. But we're watching this very closely, but we also have several weeks to go. And so we can make the projections and are tracking the projections just like you are, but to make the decision now for something that's still many weeks away feels premature. So we will be making decisions based on that data with our epidemiologists on the team and our medical experts on the team and in partnership with MDH. But we're not ready to make those decisions yet. Okay, in the interest of time, I think I'm going to pause there. Of course, you all know I'm available to you. If you have a question that occurs to you later or that we didn't get to, please just send me an email and we'll answer it that way. So thank you all very much. I will now move on to item 8, which is the provost report. Rachel?
Thank you, President Gable. Welcome, everybody. Hello, nice to see you all. I want to reiterate my congratulations that we have finished the in-person part of the fall semester without a need to pivot early or a significant outbreak. The precautions that we put in place around physical distancing in the classroom and mask wearing and the sunrise plans and the M-Test protocol have all proved to be successful. I want to extend my thanks to all of the faculty and staff and students whose efforts and resilience contributed to this success. This semester has not been easy on anyone. Faculty spent significant time and energy re-prepping their classes for new modalities, many teaching from their homes while guiding their children's education or caring for family members. Staff adjusted to new ways of working, new requests that they hadn't faced before, and increased demands for the services they were already offering. And I also heard from students about their struggles with distance education, mental health, and their desire for grading flexibility as we had in the spring. As a result, I engaged in extensive consultation. My role is to listen broadly to all the stakeholders and to synthesize the varying perspectives. I met with MSA leadership to better understand their concerns. I met with SCEP multiple times, with FCC, with the Twin Cities Dean's Council, with leadership on the system campuses. And I spent quite a lot of energy ensuring that we heard the voices from people with on-the-ground responsibilities for designing and implementing the curriculum. Associate deans for undergraduates, university-wide academic advisors, the Office of Undergraduate Education, and the Office of the Registrar. In the end, I returned to my principle around faculty autonomy. The role of the provost is not to interfere in faculty instruction or grading. Instructors have responsibility and authority to determine how grades are assigned. I sent an email on Friday, October 30th, reinforcing that perspective, but also encouraging faculty to add the SN option to their courses. As a result of that message, 380 course sections added the SN option. For this fall, we have 63% of undergraduate courses with SN grading as an option. But I also wanted to provide accommodation for those who were struggling, especially those who were experiencing severe hardships. So in that same message, I announced that for undergraduates, any student that earned an F in a class, that grade would automatically be transitioned to an N. In addition, any student that received a D in a class could request for that grade to be transitioned to an N. We offered an extension of the deadline to choose the SN option for those classes where it was offered. And we extended the time available for students to withdraw from a class as well. Students retain the ability to petition their college or department for an SN grade if they have extenuating circumstances and it's not offered by the faculty member. Since that message has come out, we've also adjusted our criteria for academic probation and halted suspensions for this fall and at the moment for next spring. I continue to welcome input and discussion and varying perspectives on this topic, including from the Student Senate, from the Faculty Senate, and from this body as well. As our fall semester closes, I wanted to provide an update on modality for undergraduate classes on the Twin Cities campus. From this fall, our modalities have been about 15% of courses offered in person, about 7.5% courses offered in a blended modality, about 60% of courses offered remotely, which is online but synchronous, and about 18% of courses offered online and asynchronous. This fall, we had over 4,500 in-person or blended seats available in courses, so students who wanted more in-person education could have it. 46% of students this fall had one in-person or blended class. As we prepare for the spring semester, we're going to retain the 6-foot physical distancing and masking requirements in the classroom. We'll also maintain the faculty autonomy in the choice of modality. At the moment for spring, our modalities look quite similar as they did for fall. We have 15% of courses in person, 6% of courses blended, about 62% of courses remote, so online but synchronous, and about 15% of courses online but asynchronous. At the moment, we have 6,478 seats that are open in in-person or blended courses. So again, students who want more of an in-person education can have it. We have about 40% of students with one in-person or blended class. People often talk about how we're living through twin pandemics. While COVID-19 is clearly a challenge, issues of structural racism in our society have become even more apparent after the murder of George Floyd and the national movement that it launched. Today, you'll hear about a suggested change to the current liberal education curriculum inspired by these developments and designed to ensure that our graduates have expertise and knowledge to help them understand and be successful in today's society. Looking ahead, in future years, I intend to revitalize the process for general liberal education reform, and I look forward to engaging with governance in both designing and implementing that process. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take questions.
So the next item are questions for the provost. If you want to raise your hand, Rachel, you can call on them directly if you'd like.
So I see Penny, I think, first in the hand queue.
Thanks. My office has a weird sunlight thing in the afternoon, so I will keep my camera off if that's okay. It's on spotlight by the sun. So just a quick question. I know there's been a lot of talk about, the extension of the furlough, for example, just acknowledgement that this is going on longer than it might have been anticipated to go on when things started up. And I'm wondering if there has been any forum where there has been a discussion about extending the tenure clock pause for tenure track faculty. And what that discussion forum might be and when we might expect to hear some news about that. This, of course, for me is not any longer a current consideration, but I have many colleagues for whom it is, and I'm concerned about them. And particularly with, as you said, the differential impact for faculty who have young children at home, who are either doing all of the childcare or supervising their children at home while they're in school, and the disproportionate impact that we know that has on women. There was that study that just came out that showed that in September alone, 217,000 men dropped out of the workforce, 865,000 women dropped out of the labor force in 1 month. So, I mean, these kinds of impacts are real, and I'm just wondering what the discussion has been amongst the leadership about trying to address this going forward. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Of course. Thank you for the question. So this has been a topic of active discussion, particularly among the Associate Deans for Faculty Affairs and Vice Provost Rebecca Ropers and me and the Twin Cities Deans Council. As some of you know, for all tenure system faculty in 2019-2020, they received an extra year on their probationary period. Any tenure system faculty member, including those newly hired in 2021, so this academic year, can request a second year extension. This is, they go online, they fill out the form. There's a new checkbox that says I'm requesting this because of stresses, impediments from COVID, and it gets approved. So while it's not going to be automatically applied to everybody, it is available to everybody. In addition, we encourage department chairs to conduct faculty evaluations and to incorporate the performance of faculty into their merit increases in future years, given that there weren't going to be merit increases this year. We're also encouraging faculty to develop and incorporate a COVID statement into their annual review materials, into their promotion and tenure materials as well, so that we can understand and incorporate the unique challenges that each faculty member faces.
Thank you. I think communicating about those directly with faculty is going to be key. I think that departments differ in terms of the degree to which the department chairs are effectively passing along this information. And of course, they themselves are overwhelmed like the rest of us are. So I just think maybe more communication about this would be helpful. Thank you again for your efforts.
Of course, thank you for the suggestion. So J-Ro, I think, is next in line.
Hi, Provost Croson. Thank you again. I know that we will be addressing this as new business, but I just wanted to ask if you had any thoughts about what is gained by privileging faculty autonomy over the voices of the students who have almost unanimously been requesting for more compassionate SN policy. And also just to comment and point out that the SN accommodation does not work for students who are taking classes for their majors or minors. So they can't opt into those if they wish to use those for credit for their major or minor. And many of the students are double majoring, triple majoring, have multiple minors, and their full course loads end up being almost all classes for their majors or minors. And I myself, in my own teaching, have come across this roadblock where I would like to, as a faculty member, reach out to a student and help them with switch to SN, but that's literally not allowed by the system. So is there a way in which, or under what conditions could we imagine a more compassionate SN policy? And I would also stress that you mentioned that they are able to petition for an SN grade, but not all students feel equally empowered or cognizant of the processes to navigate those terrains. So those are my three different points about majors and minor accommodation, faculty autonomy over students' demand, and who has the ability to navigate the petitions.
Great, thank you for the questions and for the input. So as I mentioned in my remarks, instructors have autonomy and have responsibility and authority to determine grades. The policy around S's and counting for major requirements, my understanding is that at the moment, grades of C- and above translate into S. And at the moment, the policies around what courses can count for major requirements is a C or above. And so in order to comply with both the policies that have been passed and the grading as it exists, we would need to resolve something about the C- grade. So that's, I understand, where some of the challenges are. Oh, and then the navigation. So again, every college has its own process for these appeals. I think that, we absolutely, as the previous speaker suggested for faculty, we need to communicate to students those appeals and the availability and the process by which that could happen.
Any more questions for the provost? J.R., sorry, I know you sent that question in advance and I should have called on you first. I apologize. But I'm glad we had plenty of time to get to it. Okay, and of course, I'll just speak for the provost and say if you have additional questions as time passes, of course, we are here and stand ready to answer you. Okay, I'll go to the next item, which is the FCC-SEC report. I'll call on Professor Bullman to give this report, please.
Thank you, President Gable. These are unusual times, and so it will not surprise anyone that once again, a lot has happened in the short period since the last Senate meeting. So respecting your time, I will focus on selected topics, and I will minimize the overlap with what we just heard from President Gable and Provost Croson. I want to emphasize, however, that the Faculty Consultative Committee has been involved in discussions and has been consulted on all the topics that President Gable has mentioned, as have other Senate committees where relevant to their charge. So let me first comment on professional development to support students with disabilities. Last academic year, the University Senate and Faculty Senate recommended the implementation of professional development to support students with disabilities. This system-wide professional development for university faculty, instructors, and student services staff will address accommodated instruction, testing, and best practices. A task force to examine best practices for training in this area has been charged by Provost Croson and has started to meet on a regular basis. It will provide recommendations for further considerations by the end of the academic year. Where are we with the Campus Safety Committee? In our last Senate meeting, you approved the formation of a Campus Safety Committee. The ball is now with the University Senate Committee on Committees. And earlier this week, Eddie DeVoe, chair of the Committee on Committees, informed me that her committee has started the work to seat the committee. So we look forward to see the results of the work of the Committee on Committees. Strategic plan metrics. This is really the only topic that I will mention that President Gable has mentioned in her report as well. The FCC recognizes the importance of these metrics as the system-wide strategic plan will help to shape the future of all our campuses for years to come. President Gable has reported to the FCC 2 weeks ago on this plan and has just come earlier today again to the FCC to discuss specific metrics that the FCC wanted to know more about. And so I do encourage all members of the university to engage in the discussion and use the feedback channels that President Gable has already mentioned in her remarks. SNN grading. SCEP, the Senate Committee on Educational Policy, and the Faculty Consultative Committee discussed several times the topic of SNN grading as an option for undergraduate students to choose for this fall and the coming semester. I want to strongly emphasize that the FCC understands the enormous academic and non-academic challenges that the twin pandemics brought on all of our students. The FCC also understands the concerns about students earning degrees without having met the learning goals, compromising the value of the UMN degree for our students. SCEP has looked at the many facets of this issue and reported to Provost Croson, and we appreciate all the attention that Provost Croson has given this topic and all the efforts she spent consulting with various stakeholders. One thing is clear, no SNN grading decision is perfect, neither the one that we have now nor the one, any other version that may be proposed. So regardless of whatever policy we have on that topic, I want to emphasize, regardless of any policy that we have, we call on all instructors to show compassion and help our students to navigate the difficult challenges they face. Instructors should feel empowered to adjust their courses and allow flexibility in the assessment of what constitutes evidence for sufficient achievements towards course goals. We encourage instructors to make accommodations, taking into account extenuating circumstances, such as limited access to computer equipment, slow internet access, and poor testing environments. The year 2020 was not only hard on the students, though. To that end, the Faculty Consultative Committee supported a research study led by Colleen Flaherty Manchester, Associate Professor at Carleson School. It has already been mentioned in one of the questions. Her ongoing study tries to understand faculty work and work patterns affected by the twin pandemics. This fall, she surveyed tenure track faculty, contract faculty, and instructional P&A on their use of time, changes in demands, and changes in productivity. She tries to find out how the pandemics affected the teaching productivity of P&A instructors and the research productivity of contract faculty and tenured track faculty. Professor Flaherty Manchester collected data from over 1,000 individuals. Overall research productivity took a substantial hit, yet the effect was not uniform. Faculty varied in their experiences in terms of emotional exhaustion and burnout associated with the pandemics. Some individuals were relatively unaffected by the pandemic. Some even reported higher productivity yet. And this is the most important part. I think we need to acknowledge that the largest group of faculty reported high levels of burnout and the decline in research productivity. Women, caregivers, and less senior individuals were disproportionately concentrated in that latter group. This pattern is largely present across the groups of employees examined. So we look forward to further results as the studies go ongoing. Colleen's study shows how hard this year has been for all of us. I would like to thank all of our students, staff, and faculty, and in particular, all of our senators for all the work and effort that you have made on behalf of the university. You are really the university, so thank you. And please allow me to make a special shout out to one member of our university community, Mrs. Renee Dempsey, who has worked for the Senate office for 19 years, most recently as deputy director. I've had the pleasure to work with Renee, seeing how she tirelessly supported Senate committees and in particular the Faculty Consultative Committee, which she has staffed for the last 6 years. Renee is taking the retirement incentive option and is leaving the university on January 15th. We wish Renee all the best in her journey and hope that she will soon be able to enjoy one of her favorite pastimes, traveling. Don't we all wish for that? Thank you, Renee, for all you have done for the university. This ends my report. Back to you, President Gable.
Thank you, Phil. Item 11 is a proposal to amend the University Senate rules to add additional ex officio representation to the Student Information Technologies Committee. This will be a vote for the entire University Senate. A majority of members present and voting is needed to approve the motion, but I will open it for discussion. Is there any discussion? Host, if you could initiate the poll.
We have about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 183 ayes, 3 nays, and 14 abstentions, the motion prevails.
Thank you. Item 12 is the budget landscape discussion that we have promised you. I'm going to call on Senior Vice President Franz, Interim Vice President Horstman, and Vice President Thompson to present this item.
Thank you, President Gable. I'll start off. What I wanted to do was to take just a couple of minutes to do a brief introduction and then let Vice President Tonneson and Vice President Horstman go through the details of which you, I know, want to hear about. So if you go to the first slide. So what I really wanted to do was take a few minutes, as I said, to set the stage about how we're operating in this environment and how this all started. As you all will remember, in June of 2020, the Board of Regents approved Impact 2025. And one of the things that is important I found during the many consultative processes and experiences I've had the last 2 months is to begin with the values. And the value of the Minnesota Impact 2025 reflects the university's commitment to world-class research, teaching, and service undertaken in the spirit of the university's land grant mission to equitably create access and innovation at home and with global impact. You know, one of the things that I've learned in the short 2 months that I've been here is the way that strategic plan has helped guide us through this important process. Vice President Tonneson and Vice President Horstman will talk about some of the details that we've had to adjust to given the uncertainties of this economic downturn as a result of the pandemic and also the civil unrest and social justice issues. So I think one of the key things to remember going into this process is that the strategic plan was developed over a number of years. You'll remember that it included 3 phases of planning, broad consultation over the last year with faculty, staff, and students, as well as alumni supporters and partners in the legislature across the administration. And with that in mind, we began this process of how do we adjust to the situation in fiscal year 2021 and what kind of adjustments do we need to make and how are those working? So we want to give you an update on those. But I think I just want to make one more mention before turning it over to Vice President Tonneson, and that is the revised budget forecast that we saw issued on Tuesday from the state of Minnesota. As you'll remember, there was a $2.3 billion or $2.4 billion deficit projected back in May, and that has now switched to a $641 million surplus for fiscal 21 for the state. Clearly making some great improvement, and we'll see what happens in the February forecast, but this really sets the stage to provide us with a little less gloom in terms of the economic forecast that we're looking at. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vice President Tonneson to walk through some of the budget update issues for you all to consider.
Thanks, Myron. Good afternoon, everyone. I have been asked to provide, as Myron said, an update on the budget situation for the current year, where we're at, what we're looking at, what we're doing. I want to start by saying that we got an approved budget for the year that was actually solidified back in May. And that budget is based on a number of assumptions, just like every budget is, right? The difference is this year that the potential for significant variances from budget was greater, and there is greater uncertainty than we normally faced. So what we decided to do was create a process this fall where we would do a rather in-depth review and analysis with each of our budget operating units on what they're seeing happen this year relative to what they had planned for the budget. So along those lines, these are the items you see here on this slide that we did an in-depth review of, items that would be impacted by the pandemic or potentially impacted by the pandemic. So we looked at tuition revenue, bringing in the actual enrollments that we were seeing this fall rather than the estimates we made in the spring. We looked at all other earned revenues, particularly sales and events, service income, those kinds of things that would be impacted by a change in operations. We looked at whether or not there would be reductions to what I call regular expenditures that happen every year, but because of reduced operations, perhaps those expenditures would go down. The obvious one would be travel in this particular case. And so are we going to see savings greater than we had anticipated in the budget? And then we also looked at COVID-19 related expenditures, so things specific to dealing with and addressing the impacts of the pandemic. And those, we really only focused on those if they were significant, say over $100,000 or so. So with each unit, we met with them earlier this fall in September and October, walked through all these things and what they were seeing from their vantage point. And then we also talked about the savings that they knew they would get from the furlough temporary pay reduction plan and from the RIO. And from that, we created an estimate by unit and then in total of what we anticipated the budget shortfall, I will use that term to be, for the current year. So relative to what the approved budget estimated, how are we doing? Needless to say, the budget was wrong. It is wrong every year on day one because it is just estimates based on assumptions. But this year it is more significantly wrong. And at least we anticipate that. So as of right now, we are estimating a total shortfall compared to budget of this sounds very precise, but keep in mind this is a sum of a bunch of estimates. We're estimating right now about $166 million. So definitely in the range of 150 to 175 million. I will tell you that the greatest single item in there is the, revenue impact on our auxiliaries. So that would be Twin Cities Athletics, student housing on all campuses, student dining on all campuses, parking. That's where we're seeing the largest impact by far. So with that information that we've collected from the units and worked to refine, we developed a set of recommendations on how to proceed at this point in time. As you already know, we have recommended to the president and will continue to move in this direction that the furlough temporary pay reduction program will continue past December 31st. We are also incorporating in our plan ways to use available balances and reserves in the units that themselves where these problems are occurring. We are also looking in some cases at further budget cuts, moving down that 3 and 6% budget reduction list that the units prepared earlier this summer. We are looking at moving savings from the furlough and temporary pay reduction program from units that don't need those savings, central support administrative units, like the budget office. We are getting a savings in our office, which we don't need because we have not lost any revenue. So we will be moving those savings to units that need additional help. We are also looking at the use of central reserves that the Board of Regents approved and authorized. And that was part of the FY21 budget. And then in those areas where I mentioned we have really extreme or significant shortfalls projected in the auxiliaries, we are looking at what's titled here as unique actions, only because we have not done this in memory actually, and that is to create loans for operating purposes. So we will be looking at long-term financing of some of those shortfalls in the auxiliaries. Where we're at in the process right now, we have a balanced plan, but we're not going to implement that until closer to the end of the fiscal year because we need to monitor against that plan. We need to come back in the spring several times, perhaps with each of our units and relook at what's happening with tuition and enrollment, with sales, with expenditures, anything that might have to be adjusted. And then we will modify as necessary our plan solutions at that point as well. But at least we have a plan now and it's complete and it's balanced. And we will be communicating that to the units in the next week and moving forward from there. So that's all I have as an update today. I'm moving to Ken.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to go over the F&O work group recommendations today and cover these with you. As we started the spring, we were following principles as part of the President's F&O work group. This included retaining current employees to the extent possible, consider the financial impact of decisions on our employees, with approaches weighting any financial burden toward those with a higher income level. And then another major principle that the F&O work group communicated and took to heart was addressing the financial challenge through a variety of mechanisms, including non-recurring savings and those involving organizational improvements with long-term impacts, which is the course we are still on. And within all those principles, trying to maintain as much flexibility as we could. Prior to some of the items you see on our slide here today, in the spring, we determined that we would implement a merit freeze, as well as take a slower path on hiring through a hiring freeze that did have exceptions built into it. So more of a hiring pause. Those actions were necessary because also in the spring, if you remember, We made the commitment to keep employment whole, faculty and staff and student workers. And so there was a pay continuance during that time. There were also premium payment for those who had to be on campus and working. And there was an emergency leave plan that was COVID related that was also implemented. So those were supportive of employees and retaining employment in the spring. And as we got into FY21, some of these recommendations that we now see on this slide came into practice after much consultation and planning in the work group, but also in input we received from consultative committees, discussions we had in this forum, and also a survey we did in late spring, early summer that we received over 1,100 responses to. And many of them had a common theme around protecting those with more limited incomes, that any burden asked of employees would be weighted more heavily towards those in the higher salary bands. And so that was feedback we took to heart that also existed among the members of the work group. And we implemented that as we looked at the pay reduction program and the furloughs. One item, just to backtrack a little bit on the hiring pause, we have built some data looking at 2020 compared to 2019. And what we see is about a 36% less hiring activity in 2020 over 2019. We still have hiring going on because we have to, and currently there are about 780 positions open, but probably about 62% of those are directly related to instruction or research. And many of the administrative positions that would be looked at and approved also support a lot of those important mission activities. So there is scrutiny going on, but there is also a realization that there are positions that need to be filled. The furlough and pay reduction program has resulted in, we think, estimated savings for period 1, which ran from June 22nd through December 20th of $20.75 million, including a fringe estimate. These are general estimates and not meant to be exact. As Julie indicated, the savings are by department, so it will vary by department depending on what kind of population you have impacted by this program. But likewise, for the second period, which will start December 21st through June 20th, we're expecting a similar type of savings for that program as well. If you remember, any employee with an annual base salary of $60,000 or less would be exempt from this program. And we had 49 salary bands. So those in the lower level of those salary bands typically had unpaid furlough time in a small number of hours, and that built incrementally with each band. And then as you get near the top of the band, you have a pay reduction program primarily for faculty and P&A employees in the higher tiers. That would be a percentage of salary. In conjunction with that, the president and her cabinet agreed to a 10% pay reduction. As we look at the retirement incentive offer program, which we just completed enrollment in and accepted applications through later October, we have had, and I'm just checking the population here, we had 728 employees out of about 5,800 eligible take that program. So that was a significantly higher percentage than we had estimated based on the 3 previous RIOs that occurred at the university. We thought there would be a spectrum of potential acceptance that could have been anywhere below our estimate of 7% to this was much more of a higher number than what we probably had anticipated. Of those positions, primarily the labor represented, civil service, and P&A employee groups had a majority of those positions. 40 were faculty positions, and they are distributed. I would say about 500 of those are on the Twin Cities campus. The remainder are throughout the rest of the system. So we are currently reviewing plans of how people will address those departures. There will be some positions that will be replaced, but we are being cautious and planful in that. And many of the departments and campuses are doing an overall study of how they can meet their commitments and still benefit from the savings that the RIO potentially can offer. One last item that will segue into Myron's update on where we go from here with recurring savings. We are looking as well at administrative services for future shared service opportunities. And one of the first steps in this has been a recent survey and study of all HR practices at the university, which was just completed about a week ago. And along with that activity, we also are looking at providing a catalog of HR practices and looking at the cost involved with those practices, not so much to strictly realize a different way of doing this work that would result in a cost reduction, but also looking at a way to improve responsiveness, align practices in a way that support the mission and make the best use of the resources we do have, and also increase compliance with required practices in the human resource area. And this will also connect with the similar work in finance and student services and communication and other areas of the university that will be looking at this work as we move forward. And so with that, I'll turn it over to SVP Franz to talk about that future work.
Thank you, Ken. And thank you, Julie and Ken, for the great work you both have done in this area for all this detail. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about next steps, as Ken mentioned. We have a lot of work that we're doing now, all of us. And as the president said, and the provost, this has been a really tough year for everyone. And but it's not going to stop. If I can give you some encouragement, it's that there's a lot of work ahead of us. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about right now, and then open it up for questions for Julie and Ken and myself. So first of all, one of the things we want to do is how do we look to the future? As I mentioned in my remarks after President Gabel, the leadership role of the University of Minnesota, I think, is critical, frankly, to the success of the state of Minnesota. And in order for us to take that leadership role, I think one of the things we need to do, and one of the things that the F&O work group has put together, is a recommendation to seek an RFP that was issued to seek a partner who will help us modernize our administrative and support activities. You know, there are a lot of different service levels and investments that we've made around in the systems and technology, and we want to work to make the system work better for everyone. And the goal is to improve the overall teaching and research and service that we provide. And in that process, we can use the way that we can partner to create roadmaps to do that in a much more modernized or streamlined way to make sure that our efficiencies really improve the overall service quality. And that is why, as Ken mentioned, we will make sure that the RFP vendor that we select will work with the current KPMG recommendations on the HR side to make sure we leverage that information that we have going forward. So if you go to the last slide, Julie, I just wanted to mention that we want, you will all be involved a lot, because this next step is going to involve a lot of consultation, a lot of work with the university to make sure that the vendor that we select engages with and participates with many of you in making sure that we understand where those realignments and modernization steps can take place. And one of the things that we want to do is make clear what's in scope and what's out of scope. So the language here in this last chart, the first 5 bullets are really what's in scope for the RFP, and the last one is what's out of scope. So we really want to look at modernizing and evolutionize in an evolutionary way the administrative and support activities. We want to look at all types of units and across all campuses and locations. We want to adopt alternative organizational models if appropriate. We want to use an analysis of whether we should insource or outsource certain activities. Obviously, many of you know we're in the process now of determining whether we should continue to outsource the food process, the dining facility process here at the university, or go inside and provide that inside the way we used to many years ago. So we also want to look at, are there new ways to generate revenues that we haven't thought about or we could enhance in the near future? But clearly the last point I want to make is that the academic and faculty activities that are part of the delivery of instruction and the scientific conduct of research are out of scope for this particular process. It'll be a 2-phase process where the first phase, we will ask the vendor to identify those opportunities to make these changes that really enhance the effectiveness of the U and its teaching mission, and can also save needed dollars to invest in education, research, and service. And then the implementation phase, which will begin later in probably the beginning of fiscal year 22. We anticipate that the vendor will be selected sometime in the next month or so, with work beginning, we hope, in February and concluding sometime this spring. But so what we've really done today is, I think, really put together an opportunity for you to see what we've done in response to the COVID-19 crisis, the economic and budget difficulties, and also what we're thinking about going forward. And with that, President Gable, I think we should open it up for questions, if that's appropriate.
Thank you to the 3 of you. So we have 2 hands up, and we're really tight on time. So I'm going to do those 2 questions, and then we'll evaluate to see whether there's time for any others. Of course, with a reminder that all 3 vice presidents remain at everyone's disposal for follow-up questions. Scott?
Hi, thank you. There's a feeling on the ground that the freeze, the current pause on positions, is disproportionately impacting P&A and civil service positions. Does the data affirm that feeling, or is that just a feeling that is not affirmed by what you're seeing?
Ken, I'll turn to you to answer that question.
I don't believe, as far as the hiring freeze goes, that the P&A positions are, I mean, people are doing more work. They are filling in. There are interim situations going on, but I don't know that it primarily is impacting P&A any more than our other positions.
Okay, thank you. Greta?
Thank you very much, Greta Friedemann Sanchez from the Humphrey School. So given the budget shortfalls, this is a great opportunity for the university to think creatively in terms of human resources. At the Humphrey School, we have been having discussions on 2 suggestions, and those are based on health insurance costs. So in order to be able to be eligible for health insurance, an employee has to work 50% of the time, but to be able to have the insurance covered, the minimum time of employment is 75%. So the two suggestions that we would like to float and just begin a conversation. So this is more a conversation starter and not a question. So the suggestion number one is that maybe as a university, we can study alternatives to share health insurance costs with part-time workers. And this would be a win-win because it would be less of a cost for the university. And as we have all been saying and feeling it, many individuals are burnt out. So we could consider a combination of voluntary part-time work, temporary part-time, shifting it later on to be again full-time. So, of course, how this takes shape, it requires a study. And then the suggestion number two, it would be, right now it's not possible to job share. And this could be a possibility for faculty. So for partners, domestic partners who are both faculty, they could potentially job share, and we could attract very good talent this way. In the conversations that we had at the Humphrey, we're very aware that often when there is part-time employment, there are unintended consequences. It's often women who are socialized. We are socialized to do a lot of the caregiving a lot more. And so in the long term, that can have negative consequences financially in terms of career advancement and so on. So whatever studies that we conduct, they have to be with evidence-based. I have submitted a memo to the FCC with regards to this, and I just look forward to following up with this conversation and jump-starting it. Thank you.
Thanks, Greta. All right, we can do one more question. Those of you who are in the queue, apologies, and please feel free to direct your question directly to the appropriate vice president offline, but we can take Jerry's question.
Hi, Jerry Cohen, Senator from CFANS. So Myron, I first of all, I feel sorry for you that you start all this in the middle of the COVID times, but you have a president and a provost who suffer the same, pretty much the same fate. But I was very interested in the last thing about the out of scope. So I was about ready to ask, and you put that slide up. I was going to ask, we as a university are kind of like a franchise. We have university activities that run from departments all the way up to the president. And we also have franchise holders, which are those scientists like myself that work off of grants and are basically small business people that run our labs. And one of the things that's hurt us over the years has been what they call the budget model, which sounds so benign until you actually get into the aspects. But I was curious because it's out of scope. But there are things like restarting our labs after COVID. There are things like how we deal with obtaining grants when we don't have the ability to obtain background data because of COVID and a variety of things that have happened to us. And so I was curious in the out of scope that maybe we should be in scope because the real dynamics of a university is driven by the individual investigator.
30 seconds.
And I'll stop in a minute. The dynamics of the university is by the individual investigator. And if we don't look after the health of the individual investigator, we're going to be into big trouble in the next few years. Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you, Professor. That's a great question. And I think one of the things we wanted to make it clear that we didn't want to get involved in the delivery of actual instruction and scientific conduct of research. But clearly there are a lot of support activities that go into supporting whether it's research or teaching that we can collaborate on, I think, in terms of being efficient and utilizing similar resources. I mean, one of the things that's so interesting about this time, and I appreciate your sympathy, but I jumped in with full knowledge. And I think the key here is that we're all in this together. And what we're in this together is to figure out ways that we work together, that we get unsiloed, that we look at similar activities across the hallway or in the next building and figure out ways to enhance those resources, whether it's lab resources or individual resources that you mentioned. So what you're suggesting really is in scope in the sense of looking for ways to maximize the use of our resources to deliver instruction that you all designed, to deliver research that we're engaged to deliver and to provide those services. So I think it all really fits, and I look forward to having more discussions with you about how we can be careful about that. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you. Apologies to those in the queue. We need to move on to the next item. The next item is a discussion, item 13 is a discussion of proposed changes to the diversity and social justice liberal education theme. I'm going to call on Professor Catherine Pearson to present this item. Catherine?
Great. Thank you, President Gable. And thank you for inviting me to today's Senate meeting in my capacity as chair of the Council on Liberal Education. This summer, Provost Croson proposed that all undergraduates who begin starting in fall 2021 be required to take a diversity and social justice in the United States theme course. By way of background, undergraduates are currently required to take 4 of the 5 theme courses. Diversity and social justice in the United States is one of the options, and around 28% of undergraduates do not take it. The Council on Liberal Education was enthusiastic about the Provost's proposal to make the diversity theme a requirement. This would not add to students' overall course load. It would mean that students would take a diversity course and then be required to complete 3 of the 4 remaining theme requirements. To remind people, those are civic life and ethics, the environment, global perspectives, and technology and society. But the Council on Liberal Education agreed that we didn't want to require the current diversity theme without improving the requirements to address racial justice. To strengthen it, we started with the thoughtful requirements that the Liberal Education Redesign Committee proposed a couple of years ago. We consulted with some of the faculty from LERC, the Liberal Education Redesign Committee, who spent a lot of time drafting the proposed changes to the DSJ requirements in the final LERC proposal. And after that input, CLA further worked on it. Then I took the proposal to SCEP, heard helpful reactions, and ultimately asked for more time to consult with more faculty from across the university, particularly faculty of color. As promised, I reached out to and consulted with faculty across the university, including faculty from CBS, CEHD, CFANS, CLA, CSE, and the Carlson School. Not everyone responded, but I had in-depth Zoom conversations or email exchanges with 18 faculty. Faculty were largely supportive of the proposal and suggested some helpful improvements. With that feedback, members of the Council on Liberal Education met for many hours to refine the proposal. I returned to SCEP with the updated proposal that you have before you, now titled Race, Power, and Justice in the United States. And SCEP voted in support of the requirement, the revised proposal, and the new title. I discussed this with the FCC the next day. Vice Provost McMaster and I recently met with MSA President Amy Ma. She expressed her support and subsequently let me know that, quote, MSA had a conversation about the proposed liberal education changes during our MSA executive board meeting, and it was met with widespread support. Classes that currently meet the DSJ requirements would still meet the diversity theme. They would then go up for re-review by CLE under their normal schedule. The Office of Undergraduate Education did analysis, and it is indicated that there are enough seats to fill the demand, and we expect that there would be more courses proposed. So I'm happy now to engage in a discussion with all of you about this.
Thank you, Catherine. So just to clarify, this is for discussion only. And so if you would like to raise your hand, I'll call on you for the discussion. The Faculty Senate can vote on this as a proposal at a subsequent meeting, by the way. Dana?
Hi, Fiona Nephew, student senator from UMD. I had a question on, I'm not familiar with the diversity and social justice liberal education theme. Does this apply to Duluth or other campuses, or is this just a department of Twin Cities?
Great question. This would only apply to the Twin Cities campus.
Okay, can I respond, President Gable?
Of course.
Okay, so is there is there any connections that you have with Duluth or other campuses that this could, I would be very interested in this for our college. I think this is like a really great resolution that you have going on in this course. I think would benefit our college. Do you guys have any communications with Duluth, or is just specifically Twin Cities?
So I'll answer. So work specifically is for Twin Cities, but for the Duluth campus, you would work within your own curriculum committees. I believe Lisa Irwin could guide you through, or your Vice Chancellor Fernando Delgado could guide you through in order to do the appropriate version of this through the governance specific to the Duluth campus.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. Next is Karen Sue.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this proposal. I really appreciate all the consultation and definitely am enthusiastic about it. One concern I have is about who teaches these courses. I think it's really important that for topics in this area that the instructors have research or training expertise in this area, that it's not a hobby or a personal interest that they decide they want to turn into a course. And I'm wondering if that can be part of the proposal.
Great, thank you for that helpful response. So I'm gathering reactions today and from the subsequent meetings that I've been in, and we will go back to CLE with the revised proposal. And certainly that's something that I don't want to speak for the entire committee, that we'll take into consideration. One thing that is not in the proposal, and we actually don't intend to put it in the proposal, but the CLE is committed to do this, is having teaching communities, hopefully as early as the spring semester, of faculty who currently teach DSJ classes and who would be interested in teaching them in the future and who would want to revise their syllabus to share expertise and discuss these issues, which is not the same thing as what you have suggested, but this is a helpful suggestion that I will take back to CLE. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe next is Emily.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss these ideas. And I have two questions. And I completely agree with the ideas here, the importance of systemic racism and thinking about social justice. These are ideas of extreme importance, but I also worry that the proposed LE requirements could in a way undercut some of the actual intentions, because these are interdisciplinary issues that span all of the existing LE requirements. So for example, with respect to the environment LE, there's solid research showing disparities across racial and economic lines related to exposure to environmental toxins, especially heavy metals. Similarly, the negative impacts of climate change will have disproportionate effects on BIPOC communities and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And likewise, recent surveys show that these groups are currently more concerned with climate change issues and what that means for whether their home will be habitable in 10 years. So I'm wondering if there could be some comments on whether there's been any modeling about how this would change the landscape of students taking other LE requirements, and whether there's anything in the proposal about whether some of the LE requirements in some of these other areas like the environment that cover social justice issues and systemic racism related to the environment could apply and get listed as for that LE as well. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you for these thoughtful comments and reactions. So in bullet point number 1, the committee, the Council on Liberal Education was actually very propulsive about including environmental inequities, specifically because we thought that courses taught on the environment and climate change and environmental justice actually would make a lot of sense under this proposal. And so, you know, in no way is the design here for courses to only be taught in one college. And in fact, the committee was quite you know, again, really wanted to include the environment to ensure that, you know, again, that many different types of courses could qualify here. And so this is helpful feedback.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. I believe Penny, you're next.
Thank you, President Gable. So Catherine, my question here has to do with the change in language from diversity and social justice to race, power, and justice. So my understanding is that under the former designation, a course that focused primarily on gender and social justice would have been included, or could have been included, or a course that focused primarily on sexualities and social justice could have been included, or a course that focused primarily on Indigenous peoples and social justice could have been included. And my understanding is that with the new terminology, that courses like that would no longer be included in this liberal education requirement, that would be ruled out of bounds, and that courses that don't focus explicitly on race or primarily on race as the primary dimension of social exclusion or violence would be excluded. And so I'm wondering if the committee has talked about that. I'm wondering if that is the intent of the proposal, and I'm wondering what would happen to courses that do want to focus primarily on sexualities or gender or Indigenous personhood. Where do those courses go? Do they no longer fit this requirement? Are they no longer included in kind of what we conceive of as courses that people need to take in order to fulfill these distribution requirements?
Thank you, Penny. And this is a question that the committee, the Council on Liberal Education, talked about a lot. And it is not our intent to disqualify those courses, but it is our intent to ensure that those courses integrate issues of racial justice into them. So, for example, the first bullet point says that the course promotes historical and contemporary understandings of how systemic structural inequalities that sustain social, political, economic, and/or environmental inequities, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, have been constructed and perpetuated in the United States. Then the next bullet goes on to say the course may focus entirely on racial justice or may focus on the structural inequalities facing other marginalized groups in the United States. However, all courses must fully integrate issues of racial justice. So our hope, our intent is that the class on gender, the class on sexuality, the class on disability, that those courses continue but are modified. And we recognize that to also fully integrate intersectionality and issues of racial justice. And that's one of the reasons we want to have these learning communities so that faculty will be able to do that. But if this takes effect for students entering in the fall of 2021, the current DSJ courses would still be on the books and they would come up for their regular re-review for their schedule. And so by that point, the instructors could determine whether or not they want to also fully integrate issues of racial justice and keep their courses meeting the diversity requirement, though now it's RPJ, or if they no longer want to go for the liberal ed requirement.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. And I appreciate that. I guess I'm just pointing out for consideration the fact that while it's, that's the case, it is not the case, for example, that the courses that you're envisioning would have to include a systemic focus, a real sustained focus on gender justice, right? So you're not really fully proposing an intersectional approach, right? And so that's my question, and it's also my concern, is how the name signals kind of one dimension as being a primary importance. And I understand the moment that we're living in, and I also understand like a historic precedent for why this is a crucial dimension to consider, but there's no requirement here that a course on kind of race and social justice needs to fully account for gender, right? Or that a course on race and social justice needs to fully account for
30 seconds.
And that's of concern, right? So is there any plan to address that?
I will certainly bring your comments back to the council, but as it currently stands in the diversity and social justice requirement, there's sort of no requirement that any course covers gender, say, a course may cover gender, and so yes, this new proposal would require that every course thoroughly covers race, but could also cover other topics as well. But as you know, it certainly would not require that every course covers gender.
Well, no, that's exactly right. But I mean, the old requirement, there wasn't a requirement that any particular course focus on all of these dimensions. And I'm just pointing out that the new requirement doesn't require that all the courses take simultaneously into account a fully intersectional approach.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Hi, Catherine. Thank you again for sharing and receiving our feedback from SCEP. Since this is just a point of discussion, I just wanted to float this. I had raised the point of concern that many faculty of color, at least the ones I know of, who teach in CLA, teach on race, gender, sexuality outside the United States. And so my point of question was that, my question was basically that though you formulated this idea of the learning communities, what will or may end up happening is that people of color who have been overwhelmingly asked to take on the service burden of educating colleagues and peers will end up educating colleagues and peers to enhance curricula that they won't get the benefit of having the added enrollments of students in their classes. And I also wanted to ask, like, to what extent will there be a global perspective on race allowed? And so sort of thinking about, and maybe building upon Penny's question about the idea of not only interdisciplinarity, but also widening the lens from a US exceptionality standpoint.
Great, thank you. And this, you thoughtfully raised the point about a global perspective on race in the first SCEP meeting, which I really appreciated, and brought that back to CLE, and we talked about that. And the current requirement is a diversity and social justice in the United States course. And this course, indeed, we talked about in our proposal is race, power, and justice in the United States, in part because so many of our undergrads are actually unaware of the situation in the racial inequities within the United States. And we felt that it was important that they have that perspective, and in part because there is the global perspectives theme already that is a possibility. Now, to be fair, we're not requiring the global perspectives theme, but someone certainly could get a course approved about global perspectives on race, very easily through CLE. And again, it wouldn't be, global perspectives wouldn't be a requirement, and so I understand the difference there. But the committee, the council actually felt quite strongly that this should be a US focus, but at the same time, we would certainly encourage new proposals for global perspectives as well, even as that is not a requirement. I 100% hear you about faculty of color being sort of overburdened with service, and hear that, and participation in these communities would be both voluntary and much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, I believe this is the last question. Jerry?
I always get the last question. But I'm probably not very popular with the Liberal Education Redesign Committee because I spoke heavily against their redesign model before. And part of the reason I did was because they had, although talked to people, they hadn't included people of diverse backgrounds in their thinking. And they actually hadn't read current things like the current thought in how liberal education should be redesigned in the 21st century. Things like the Chronicle of Higher Education and others that have put out some really good reports on that. And likewise, I was just looking at the Council of Liberal Education, and you don't really have any thought leaders on that group in the topic that we're talking about. And I would, strongly recommend, before we move forward to this, that you have people who actually understand things like race, power, and justice as people who help formulate these thoughts. And I'm particularly disturbed, because I'm a CFANS representative, that food justice is missing from all of your documents. We are a land-grant institution. Food justice is very important in our communities nationwide. It's especially important during COVID. And missing that only tells me that either you don't know what campus you're on, or you're not represented well by scientists. I see there's one member of animal science, but she's a teaching professor.
30 seconds.
But I just want to reiterate that we're not going to have a good plan unless you have real academics involved in formulation of these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's a helpful suggestion about food justice that I will certainly take back. I mean, the CLE, we did make an effort to consult widely across the university within every college, and we built our proposal based on the thoughtful work of the Liberal Education Redesign Committee that worked on the new requirements specifically. But I am more than open to talking to additional faculty if there are particular people that you think I should be consulting with. Feel free to email me. I'm very much willing to reach out to people.
So there are in fact a couple more questions and we do have time. So next is Karen Sue.
Thank you. Yeah, so a few things have been said that I want to address. And the first I'll just say is that, I think that suggesting that faculty on a faculty committee might not be real scholars is pretty offensive. So I'll just put that out there. And I really appreciate the commitment of the committee to try and have encourage that these courses would be taught across the colleges. That said, I want to reiterate my very strong concern that the courses are taught by people who have either research and or training expertise on the topic, that it not be a hobby. And that means that it's not just that they, a chemist who might, I don't know, maybe there is a chemist who does work on environmental racism. I want to be sure that their course, that their expertise and their training incorporates issues of power and racial justice, that it's not just about chemicals and geography. Okay, so I just want to reiterate that and make that very, very clear. The other thing I want to speak to is the service burden issue. I appreciate that it's voluntary and appreciated, but we still need to reimagine the university for the 21st century and to think about how we value that kind of work. And until we give faculty of color the same kind of appreciation for the work that they do to educate their
30 seconds.
colleagues and peers around these issues that they get from doing other kinds of research, it puts an unfair service burden on those faculty. And we need to be more attentive to how that happens in the university. So I'm just going to put that on the table. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, now in fact, the last question, Mattia.
Hi, my name is Mattia Aller and I am a CSE student senator. So I just have a couple of points. So you guys sort of talked about a lot about your faculty consultation. Has there been any student consultation on this? And have you made sure to include BIPOC students? Because at least from my personal experience and the experiences of some of my peers, like classes like these can often sort of feel isolating. I'm afraid that, there could be an unintended consequence of having curriculum like this and the fact that it might sort of drive away BIPOC people from this particular field. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. There have been undergraduates who have reached out to the provost specifically and to me specifically in support of this. And then separate from that, the Vice Provost McMaster and I met with Amy Ma, president of MSA, and she shared the proposal with the MSA Executive Committee. But I'm certainly open and happy to consult with more students, and I'd be happy to talk further with you going forward. So thank you for these comments.
Okay, thank you. All right. So again, if there are follow-up questions or additional questions, Catherine, I'm going to volunteer you to have people reach out to you directly to continue the conversation and consultation, with a reminder that this will come up again when it takes the form of a proposal, and we can continue the conversation at that point. So thank you very much for your presentation and for everybody's remarks and feedback. The next item is a statement from the Senate Library Committee and is presented for information only. Item 15 is old business, and there is no old business. Item 16 is new business. Please note that any new business will be referred to committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there new business? I see James Farnsworth has his hands up. James?
Thank you, President Gable. James Farnsworth, CEHD undergraduate student senator. I, on behalf of many student senators and other students, would like to bring forward the Universal SN resolution for under new business and then make a motion for immediate consideration.
Thank you. Okay, so I believe we take that first as the motion for immediate consideration, and then depending on that outcome, we'll consider the second motion. So is there, can you form just that motion for us first, please, James?
Yeah, so the motion would be, in order, because there's no process to amend the agenda for the Senate. This would be, since we're bringing an item up in new business, in order for it to be immediately considered in the same meeting, the motion would be for immediate consideration of this resolution, and it needs a 2/3 affirmative vote of all university senators present and voting in order for it to move forward.
Okay, perfect. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, this is not a debatable motion, so we'll bring it forward immediately for a vote. Host, if you could please post the poll.
I'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 155 ayes, 35 nays, 12 abstentions, the 2/3 majority passes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, James, if you could rephrase the underlying motion, please.
Yeah, so I believe now, maybe this is a clarification question, but I believe now we just open up into discussion of the resolution. So I'm not sure if there's another motion I need to make, or if it just goes right into discussion of the resolution, and we'd have just very brief opening comments then at that point. But I guess I would actually may put the question back just for clarification.
Actually, I've just received the clarification. So yes, you're exactly right. It's fine to go directly to the debate. So I'll allow you to tee this up, please, then.
Absolutely. Really appreciate the opportunity. And just very brief comments. As members of the University Senate are aware, this has come up relatively short time frame from an ask on behalf of students. From a kind of procedural standpoint, I'm listed as the author because I'm a student senator, but this is a really collaborative effort stemming out of the Minnesota Student Association Academic Affairs Committee and other students system-wide to ask for universal SN grading. The Morris Campus Student Association has passed a resolution on this, the Minnesota Student Association. And as you can see, and just to provide a brief moment of clarification in case you didn't see your email, you should have a fresh copy of the resolution in your email titled University Senate Resolution Universal SN Revised in parentheses, just a cleaner copy. The Student Senate earlier today passed a very, very similar resolution by a overwhelming majority, 96% affirmative vote. And the changes that were made between then and now are reflective of feedback from faculty senators and P&A senators who have reached out. You can see under the "it is resolved" clauses what the asks are, and it essentially is asking what the university did earlier on in the pandemic regarding SN grading. So I will really briefly yield to my co-author, and then we'll leave it open for senators.
Thank you. And like my colleague James just said, this is a very important issue to many of the students on our campuses. And I think we've all been driven to discover new ways of dealing with the effects of this pandemic. And I can genuinely empathize with anyone struggling with this during this time. And for the sake of time, I'll cut that. So thank you.
Okay, so I'll tee this up with a couple of points. So first, I want to sort of clarify the administrative intention in setting SN policy, both in the spring and now, and particularly speaking on behalf of the provost, is to facilitate through this very complicated time. In case there is any question, the administration has little to negative desire to become involved in the relationship between the faculty and the students in the setting of grades. The only role of the administration is to hear the voices in their expression of what their expectations are around a policy, and then in this case, find the compromise solution to that policy in this unusual time. With full compassion for the challenges that the students are facing, and of course, in their own way, faculty and staff too. And then to announce it with sufficient notice so that we could have debate as the case may be, and also so that administratively faculty and students can plan for how they would implement their courses, how the registrar would record grades, etc. But we're very happy to hear from this group. My understanding of the governance and process, just as a point of clarification, is that this is advisory, but I do think that's an important note for us to discuss both in the context of the motion itself and in what we are deciding. So with that, I would like to call on Carol Chomsky just to advise us and then get to the underlying motion. So Carol?
Carol, you're muted.
Thank you. You'd think I'd be better at this by now. I confirm what President Gable said, thank you, about the nature of this motion. It's brought to the University Senate, which is appropriate. It's on behalf of students. Students, as well as faculty, as well as staff, actually have expressed some opinions in materials that were sent. So it is being brought to the University Senate. The University Senate does not have authority to direct with respect to these items, but can certainly advise. And the president and the provost have indicated the willingness, the encouragement of listening to that advice and considering it. So I think to talk about it and discuss it and adopt the resolution, but whatever the language says, it will be taken as advisory. I see James nodding, and so that's helpful. It does seem that it may be necessary, and it's a long resolution, and I don't want to take this on myself to do, but it seems as though making sure that it is clear what is being voted on, what the resolution is. It was sent, and then a version of it was sent, and so it may be important to clarify specifically what the resolution would be so that in the discussion and in the vote, it's clear what is being voted on.
Thank you, Carol. James, would you read the resolution into the record?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And my roommate just started vacuuming during the most important moment of the whole meeting. So I'll try to get through it. Anyways, I would direct people who are viewing the document to page 5, and then I will just read that it is resolved clauses. So it is resolved that the University Senate, and just a quick note to Vice Chair Chomsky's point, you'll see the word instructs in here, but we understand that this what the function of the University Senate is when passing legislation. So therefore it is resolved that the University Senate instructs the Office of the Provost in conjunction with the Office of Undergraduate Education and the Office of the Registrar to allow all University of Minnesota undergraduate students to choose an SN grade basis for any or all of their classes in the 2021 academic year. It is resolved undergraduate students would be allowed to count classes taken under an SN grade basis for all graduation and program requirements, provided they would have earned a grade that would meet those requirements under an AF grade basis. It is resolved that any switch to SN grade basis would be accompanied by an informed consequences communication, which will acknowledge possible impacts to students when applying for post-secondary programs or for career or professional accreditation. It is resolved that undergraduate students would be allowed to switch between grade bases for classes until after a reasonably brief period following the submission of final grades in a term. It is resolved that credits taken in this academic year would not count against any limit on the number of credits taken using the SN grading basis. It is resolved these options would be made available to undergraduate students without additional restrictions. It is resolved the university would make no attempt to disfavor a student in any way for their choice of grade basis. It is resolved that because every student at the University of Minnesota is affected by the aforementioned circumstances, the University Senate believes all students on all campuses should be extended these grade basis options. It is resolved that graduate and professional programs should undergo consultation with their students with the goal of implementing these options as well to the furthest reasonable extent. It is resolved that SCAP shall report to this Senate and the office, or to the University Senate and the Office of the Provost, its opinion on the necessity of continuing some or all of these accommodations in the 2021-2022 academic year, no later than its first meeting of that year. It is resolved that while further changes to grading policy may be necessary, the University Senate has no additional recommendations at this time. It is resolved that the University Senate forwards to SCEP the matter of recommending clear and permanent guidelines for each campus and academic program to determine when grade basis options can or should be modified for future terms. It is resolved that these guidelines should be developed based on the consensus of the entire university community. It is resolved that the University Senate commits to the principle of continuous improvement in standards and practices of academic evaluation, grading, and certification. And then finally, it is resolved that the University Senate directs immediate communication of these changes in the interest of the academic careers of University of Minnesota students. President Gabel, I think you're on mute.
Seriously? Sorry, everybody. Okay. I see there are a couple of hands up, but if everybody could just indulge me for a moment while we think about how to best use the time we have to discuss this, given the pace at which this is going. I'll go ahead and take the first question while we do a little procedural figuring out and call on Mike Miller. Mike?
Hi, President Gabel and Senators. I'm Mike Miller. I'm a senator from the President's office. So I believe, President Gabel, you're my constituent. This is a very important resolution and advisory for me. I'm in a unique spot as not only a P&A employee, but I was a student last year. And the reason I'm not a student this year is because of COVID. I had a very difficult time learning using the online method, and students were not given the choice to choose between in-person and online. That was established by the university and by the faculty. At our first Senate meeting of this school year, President Gabel, you said that flexibility was going to be the key to getting through COVID. And this is an example of that. We need to be flexible with these students' grades because we don't know what people are going through. We don't know how difficult it is for them in their home environments to learn, to succeed. For those of us who are employees, when we had our performance reviews last summer, I know in my case, and I'm assuming in others' cases, the people we report to took into account the difficulty of working from home. And this is very comparable to that, taking into account what the students are going through.
30 seconds.
You know, and I understand the importance of letting faculty determine what a student's grade is. However, this doesn't necessarily get in the way of that. You still have the ability to tell the student, hey, you know what, you got an 85 in this class, or hey, you got a 78 in this class. All we would be changing with this is how that's reported on their transcript. And I think it's important to give the students some flexibility over protecting their GPA during unprecedented times. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. The next hand is Eric Bomberg. Eric?
Yes, hi, thank you very much. I will not be taking the full 2 minutes. I just wanted to say, admittedly, as a primary researcher in the medical school, I'm a university faculty senator, and I'm the vice chair of the Faculty Advisory Council for the medical school. Admittedly, as a primary researcher in the medical school, I am fairly far removed from anything that has to do with undergraduate courses and gradings and all of that stuff. But I just wanted to state that myself and a number of my colleagues in the medical school are very supportive of the concept of shared governments overall, and that includes for all stakeholders, very much also including students, of course. And I would say that we've definitely taken recent notes of the efforts of students at this meeting. We've all been significantly impacted by this pandemic, and I completely understand and would be supportive of this effort as well too. I just wanted to state for the record that I commend all of the students for bringing forward these concerns and issues that really affect them to these Senate meetings. I think it's fantastic. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Christina?
Hi, I'm Christina Crone. I am also a part of the Faculty Senate, and I'm also from the medical school, which also means I'm fairly reserved, fairly distant from undergraduate grades. My primary interaction with undergraduates and their grades are for people who are wanting to go to medical school. And in medical school, we already have a fair amount of research and practice of having people have pass-fail grades as opposed to letter grades. And a lot of this is done specifically to support the mental health of our medical students. Having had discussion here today, specifically talking about trying to support the mental health of everyone within our university, seeing that the students were able to specifically state that this is something that would help during this time, I think that should be very much put under consideration. When the provost stated that extraordinary circumstances could be something that a student could use to petition for a pass-fail grade or SN grade. It seems like the majority of 2020 is an extraordinary circumstance, and that does sort of fit with broad extraordinary measures. So I very much support this. I also just want to finish with one story. My interactions with pre-meds is often about the courses that they find most difficult, those weed out courses, particularly chemistry courses. And interactions with students in one course, over a quarter of the students dropped the course when the professor was not accommodating during this time frame. And so those students are not going on further to pursue their medical dreams, or at least they're deferring them yet another year because of inflexibility. And I think putting our students' mental health first should come above our professor autonomy. Thank you all.
Thank you. I believe, Ben, you're next. Ben?
Hi there. So again, I'd like to applaud and thank the students for their activism in this area. Minoritized and marginalized populations have always borne the brunt, a disproportionate brunt whenever anything is difficult. And so perhaps one upside of the pandemic is that the stresses of the pandemic are felt more broadly to the point where we now are asking to make these kinds of systemic changes. That's probably a good thing. The one qualm I have with this is thinking about it in terms of sort of the equity impact. Is the impact of this going to be equitable? This is going to take quite a lot of work done in a very short time frame to implement this and make it work. So for example, in the department that I'm the chair of, I'm a faculty senator from Speech Language Hearing Sciences in CLA. In the department that I'm a chair of, we have 2 credentialed programs where we train people to be speech language pathologists and audiologists. And one of the ways that we track people's attainment of competencies required for that is through grades. Now, admittedly, those are graduate students, but there are undergraduate programs in nursing where similar decisions might be made. And it's going to take a lot of creative last minute thinking to figure out how to make an SN policy work, particularly if the goal is for this to happen by the end of this semester. And, you know, that's just what 2020 has required. Those of us who have been put into leadership positions, who've been drafted into leadership positions, have had to do an extraordinary amount of work to
30 seconds
running. But it just upsets me to think that this resolution was crafted without even in the document itself acknowledging that this is going to take a lot of extra work, and that work is going to fall on the people who traditionally get assigned to do this kind of service, which is not a random sample of the university community. In fact, it's very often the grown-up versions of the same populations who are being disproportionately affected as students. And so I applaud the students, and I think I support this measure in the spirit of it. And I encourage the students to think about sort of the equity of the impacts of this decision and any other further recommendations they make in the future. Thank you, goodbye.
President Gable, I think you were muted again.
Jennifer?
Hi, sorry I'm speaking so much, but I'm glad to have these issues on the table and up for discussion. I also want to thank the student activists and senators and all the people who put work into this resolution, particularly Zaina Jan, who was pulled together a great number of surveys and interviews from the dental school. I know SCEP has spent hours upon hours of discussing this, and I wanted to quickly just bring up some perspectives responding to two of the cons point. So the first con was that the spring 2020 included an unplanned transition to remote learning, and in contrast, instructors had time to prepare for fall. And my response to that is, in my work coordinating with critical disability studies in campus, I've really thought about how students have been spending 12, 13, 14 years of their lives learning in a non-online way, not on Zoom. And so it's research and study skills are having to adapt and retool 12 plus years of how they learn and think. And so even though we had a couple more months to adjust over the summer, it really is a dramatic seismic shift, I think, for student learning on the student learning end, as well as the instructor end. And my second point is that I know people have talked about the compromised value, quote unquote, of a UMN degree. And I would say to that, similar to the medical school faculty, we don't really know how graduate admissions and graduate school applications, professional things will look. The landscape will change. And my second sort of add-on point is I like to tell people we're a university and we're not a factory. We're not manufacturing degrees. We're not worried about the quality control of degrees. We need to worry about mentorship, compassion, and really being there for our students when we can. If we have the capacity to, we should do this. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next is Christy.
Good evening. My name is Christy, she, her pronouns. I am a medical student senator. I guess there's a lot of us from the medical student school who are passionate about this particular issue. I first want to say that this resolution is all about equity. And so of course, equity exists in a lot of different realms, but I think we should keep that in mind. As a fourth year medical student applying to residencies, I will say that in my experience, everybody knows that this has been a very difficult year. And I would argue that people looking at degrees right now and students who have gone through the 2020-2021 school year understand the circumstances of this year and the difficulty that students have had. And so I think any sort of compromised education that students will have will be understood, is at least my hope. I also want to say that one could argue that the U of M degree is already sort of compromised by being largely online this year. I feel that is largely the view of a lot of students. And it would likely only be for this school year that this change would happen. And so I believe I'm in full support of this resolution that we should make a clear action in the name of equity and not rely on the compassion and resourcefulness when it comes to the sort of appeals and support of individual faculty. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Carl?
Thank you, President Gable. Carl Flink from the Faculty Consultative Committee and Director of the Dance Program in CLA. I'm interested in hearing from either President Gable or her staff. There's been a number of policy changes made to grading up to this point, and I'm wondering if there could be a statement about how this proposal is substantively different in its effect from what already exists. With the idea in mind, concurring with Ben Munson, that changes like this do have other effects on staff and other employees within the university when we make dramatic changes like this. So I'm just interested in hearing a little more about what is the actual difference between what's being proposed and what currently exists.
Thanks, Carl. I think for that, I'll call on the provost. Rachel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. So at the moment, what we have is the universal N. This is a shorthand, but the universal N. So all Fs become Ns, Ds can become Ns at the student's request. What this is requesting is the universal S, so that all students, once they see their grade, could change their grade to an S grade, and that S grade would count toward major requirements. Now, that's not, as I said in a question before, that's not exactly consistent with, there's not a consistency between the grade, underlying grade that would count for a major requirement and the S grade. So there would need to be some kind of manual going back and checking if someone had an S and wanted to apply to a major requirement, what was the underlying grade they got. So that would need to be, done, I think, by hand. I guess the other big difference is that at the moment, the accommodations that are in place were just for the Twin Cities undergraduate population, with professional programs sort of each determining their own grading scheme. Whereas my understanding about this resolution, and I welcome to hear from the authors, is that it would apply to all students across the university, graduate, undergrad, and professional, and all campuses.
Just a quick response to that. I believe because there was a lot of discussion within the Student Senate about and some difference of opinion between graduate and professional students, it is just calling for system-wide undergraduates. Then there's a second clause in the resolution asking essentially for graduate and professional programs to explore this to its reasonable extent.
Great, thank you.
Carl, do you have any follow-up?
I don't. That actually helped clarify some questions.
Great, thank you. Next up is Ellen Messer-Davidow.
Let me see if I can turn on my video. No, it won't let me. Yeah, I think that the purpose behind the adjustments to SN grading that have been made and the proposed adjustments tell half the story if we're trying to help especially challenged students during this COVID era. I have students who, probably about 25% of my students, who are challenged in a variety of ways. They contracted COVID, they have serious depression or anxiety and are under treatment, and they may have language issues or technology issues, and they haven't done a good bit of the work for the course. And even though I've reached out to them, a few of them have only responded in the last, in these final weeks. I was thinking we need an option whereby a student can drop or withdraw from the course as late as the last day of classes. Because if the student opts for S&N and gets an N is still a little black mark on the record. So I would like to see maybe a revision of the student's wonderful proposal to consider the other half of the equation, and that is
30 seconds
who are really underwater have a drop option that they can exercise so that they don't end up with N's on their record.
Can I respond to that? Sorry.
Yes, Jack, go ahead.
I'd like to yield to Briggs on this issue.
Briggs?
Hi, Briggs Sobel, pronouns him, his. I'm the chair of the Student Senate and Student Senate Consultative Committee. I just want to remind that that was a very, it really closed down the lens on what's happening. Everyone is going through a different situation. So in front of all 242 individuals here, I'll tell you what's going on in my family. On Tuesday, I lost my great-grandmother of 102 years old to COVID. I don't really want to share that to some of my professors. And so I think to simplify an issue of depression and anxiety, who may not feel as though they want to reach out to a professor, I think that's unjustifiable. And so I would like just to remind the University Senate that everyone is going through very differing issues in their life right now. And SNN is just giving the ability for students to have just some sort of sense of control over their lives. And so I don't really find this to be a really complicated issue. I understand that this might be a lot of things where we have to have people on the ground implementing hand-by-hand issues, but to simplify the notion that students are reaching out by email, that's just you just can't do that.
May I respond?
Sure, Ellen.
Thank you very much. I'm not suggesting that students share private information with professors, but we do know if they're not submitting written assignments or participating in Zoom meetings or whatever else. And so it's not that I expect my students to tell me why. It's that I don't want to see them not do the work and then perforce get an N or a D or an F at the end of the semester when they had extenuating circumstances that they definitely don't have to share with me, but they also don't get a black mark on their record. That's all I'm concerned about.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Bethany Hansen. Bethany?
Thank you, President Gable. Bethany Hansen, Civil Service Senator. I also want to thank the students for bringing this important issue up. I'm curious to know why, if I'm understanding things correctly, in the spring of 2020, the universal N or SN option was provided across the board. And I'm just curious about the rationale why that wasn't just sort of naturally extended into this current semester, or what the institution saw as the drawbacks or cons to extending it.
I'll turn to the provost since she owns this policy to describe the process. Rachel?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So indeed, the spring was an abrupt pivot, right? Nobody was prepared for it. Nobody knew what they were getting into. It was, we all remember, it was quite a unexpected situation. The thinking about this semester is that, of course, faculty were choosing modalities. They were preparing for the modalities. Students were choosing their courses, knowing the modalities. There was at least a little bit more intentionality and I would say comfort, but ability to manage the learning environment and the course loads. I should add that the policies last spring were not universal. So professional colleges retained professional programs retained their own grading options, as I believe did the graduate programs. So it wasn't quite, and it wasn't quite as sweeping, I think, perhaps as some people might be talking about today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Rachel, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, I want to pause for a moment because there are still several hands up and the meeting is scheduled only to extend until 3 more minutes, until 5 o'clock. If we want to take those questions, we will need a motion to extend. If the questions were more for commentary, then you can withdraw the question and pose it directly to the either to the provost or to the drafters of the resolution as you would prefer. But in any case, we would need a motion to extend in order to hear everyone who has their hand up. Is there anyone?
So moved.
Okay.
I second.
All right. Sarani, as the motion maker, can you state how long you would like the extension to be? Normal would be about 10 or 15 minutes.
Since there are 3 hands up, perhaps 10 minutes so that we can have all 3 people speak, and then 2 minutes to close and then vote.
Perfect. Sarani, you are next.
Thank you. Last semester, the law school chose to go mandatory pass-fail, mandatory SN, and it did this for many reasons. This semester, I want to highlight that this proposal does not ask professional schools to universally go that way. We're instead recommending that they consider it. So I completely support this proposal because it doesn't threaten our accreditation status. But the reason I support it is because last week there was this diversity data drive that Dr. Krista Surya and Dr. Scott Lanyon kind of presented all this information about the terrible mental health impacts of this pandemic. And it seems like it's getting worse as time goes on. And just knowing that you have the safety net of being able to flip your grades to SN might make a difference that could make like a dramatic difference in like even one undergraduate student's life. And that might be worth it, worth all this trouble. And therefore I ask you to vote yes.
Thank you. Mike?
Mike Miller, Senator from the President's Office. I just want to respond to a couple of things that the provost said. When talking about the universal S, I don't really see it that way. If a student does C- work in a class, even if it's in their major, they still pass the class. If they do A+ work, they still pass the class. All you're doing is changing that A+ through C- to an S. It's not, and if they do passing work, they do passing work, no matter how we label it. And then Provost Croson also mentioned that students registered for their classes knowing what the modalities would be. That isn't universally true. Registration for some students started in April of last year. I know many students that assumed we'd be back in the classroom by September, but modalities weren't chosen until August. So several students weren't necessarily able to choose their modality. And just as an example, I know of one student who had to dissect a sheep brain in her apartment. You're not going to get the same experience that you're going to get in the classroom with someone who knows what they're looking for, helping you dissect a sheep brain. I just think that we really need to take into account the realities of what happened, and that students deserve a little control over their GPAs in these times. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. All right, last question, Brian Mondi.
Hi, so Brian Mundy, I'm a PNA senator in Rochester, and this is actually just clarificatory, right? So this is coming up quickly, obviously, because the semester is coming to an end quickly, but it would apply to all campuses. So were students on all campuses consulted in constructing this, or was it just the Twin Cities and Morris, I think, are listed?
James or Jack?
So this would be a recommendation for all system-wide undergraduates. The Twin Cities and Morris are referenced in the resolution because the Morris Campus Student Association and the Minnesota Student Association here on the Twin Cities campus have passed similar resolutions.
And also the student body presidents of all campuses were contacted.
And they were in support?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Duluth senators were also made aware of this, just as a point of information. And I'm from Duluth. I'm listed as a co-sponsor as well. Duluth also passed a similar resolution in our Congress a few weeks ago. And I brought this resolution to the Duluth senators' attention before Student Senate.
Thank you, Annie, for adding that. My apologies.
And also the Rochester senator in the student senate meetings showed her support.
Any other, we have time for one more question if there are any more, given the extension. Ryan?
Sure, thank you. So I'm Ryan Elliott, CSE faculty senator. I was just hoping for to better understand the 1 point. So generally, I'm very supportive of the motion. The 1 point that I don't quite follow is the need for students to be able to change, or the benefit for students to be able to choose to change to SN after seeing their assigned letter grades. I'd hope for some clarification there.
James, please.
Sorry. I was actually wondering if, and she doesn't know this is coming, if Sarani from the law school student senator would answer this question, because I think she gave a really compelling answer to that exact point in our student senate meeting earlier today, if Sarani's around to answer that. Otherwise, I can try to recap what she said.
Sarani, are you available?
Yes, I am. Sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Ryan.
Yeah. So the law school. So one of the reasons. So actually, James, could you repeat the question very quickly?
Actually, Ryan, we'll let Ryan repeat the question. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I was just trying to understand what the benefit is to for students to be able to change to an SN scale after they know their final letter grade.
Right.
Seems like a possibility for gaming the system on GPA.
Right. I'm so sorry about like the flub just now, but here's the reasoning. There's a lot of data that shows that women and persons of color and people who enter places like a university system consistently underrate their capability. So if you asked a person who's already under a lot of pressure, like we are all under a lot of pressure simply because on the basis that we are in the middle of a pandemic, if you ask a person who has these other identities to decide ahead of time blindly whether or not they want to switch, they might make a decision that's disadvantageous to them. Now, if we had started the semester with sort of a different approach, maybe the solution would be different, but this late, and like given that this is a last minute decision, I think it would not be appropriate to promote the people who would choose that option are risk averse, and like we don't, and it doesn't have like good equity concerns to kind of promote that, which is why I support this as it stands, which is let people look at their grade and then make the decision.
Thank you, Sarani. Kevin?
Hi, I'm Kevin Kelly, CS Senator. I have a question for you just after that last comment there. Why did this take so long to get here? Why didn't we think about this before, at the beginning of the semester? This seems very rushed at the end. And maybe that's just the way the machinery goes, but this is something that may have been better at the beginning of the semester to bring up, so we'd have the whole 3 months to consider this and the merits, and maybe there's other issues with this. So that's my question. Thank you.
I'll start with that, and then James or Jack, if you want to reply. So the governance around a policy like this is unclear, to say the least, because this is an abnormal time and an abnormal decision. And so the provost who holds or owns, is the language that we use, the overarching policy, engaged in a shared governance process to find a compromise response to the different concerns that were expressed about grading. That involved multiple Senate committees and other types of consultation, with that decision being reported at the end of October. And so it's lots of things would have been nice to be able to do early, but the process of developing that first phase of the recommendation took time in order to engage in the consultation. Then, of course, those who reacted to it or disagreed with it needed to do their own consultation to prepare the alternative proposal. So while it is frustrating and administratively difficult, as several people have pointed out, to do this now, it is a challenging time, and consultation takes time. In normal circumstances, it takes more time now. So I'll defer to, of course, James or Jack, obviously, to speak on behalf of the drafters of the resolution.
Actually, pretty much second everything that President Gabel has just said, and add that in the document or in the folder of supplemental information that was distributed by the University Senate office this afternoon, if you really got through all of it and got to one specific part in the SCEP minutes that were included in there, or maybe not in those minutes, but a different set of minutes, that students have been talking about this starting in July in SCEP, in the RSGAs, in different student governments. And to what President Gabel said, the people, in this case students, who perhaps wanted to respond with something different, it does take time to develop that as well. And well, here we are. So I think I'll end it with that.
Thank you very much. And we just got that packet yesterday, so it's hard for some of us to read through that stuff. So I appreciate their answers.
Thank you, Kevin Kelly. Kevin Wendt.
Thank you, Madam President. I think the reasoning given for why allowing changing from an SN to an A through F grading is truly beneficial for those who underestimate their abilities, especially in underrepresented communities. I think that's a really strong one. So then the question then becomes, what's the implication of allowing switching from SN to A through F, but not allowing switching from A through F to SN? That's what I haven't heard yet. Why is that beneficial to students and not going to cause problems of gaming GPA, removing all C's from your GPA, leaving only your A's and B's because you didn't switch to SN, artificially raises GPAs? Those are potential concerns. So what's the response there? What are the benefits of allowing A to F changing to an SN after seeing your grade, your final grade.
Thank you. And I should note that that needs to be the last question. So forgive me, James, is that in reference to the change that you're seeking, or is that in reference to the current status?
My interpretation of that question is that it's kind of an expansion of the question asked earlier, and that explanation given by the law school student senator about the advantages of seeing or being able to pick the SN after your grade. So I think some of the answer to that could be subjective. So I will just say, increased flexibility is really important right now. So that would be one thing, but I don't know if there's actually a really clear objective answer to that question.
Okay, thank you all for the discussion, particularly at the end of a long day. So with that, we will call the vote on this motion. Host, if you could please post the poll.
Give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote.
I just wanted to ask if everybody was voting on this one, or is it just faculty?
This is a University Senate vote.
Thank you.
And last call. There being 153 ayes, 36 nays, and 8 abstentions, the motion prevails.
Okay, thank you. Is there any additional new business? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay. I'm going to, in the interest of time, dispense with any discussion, and thank you all very much, and look forward to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.